Hey, let's start the show.
For Friday, August 5th, 2022. Welcome to This Is Only a Test, the official podcast of Tested.com. Hello and welcome to an end of week. Oh my goodness, it's late at night. We are slurring our words, but thank you for joining us. I'm Norm, and here with me, fellow Bat fan Kishore Hari.
I don't think I'm slurring my words. I do smell toast, so we'll see how this all goes.
How you doing, Kishore?
I'm doing well. This has been too much this week. Just too much. A lot. Too many people passed away. Too much news. Too much pop culture news. Too much science news.
Too much political news. There were primaries. It's a fascinating, and we'll get to, of course, the big top story. But it was in a heavily real-time social media world, which we've existed in, we've lived in forever, right? It was so interesting. I don't know if that's even the right word, but it stirred up so many different feelings I had just with the onslaught of all the wide-ranging roller coaster of news that you mentioned, from important people passing away to just like I felt my attention struggling to keep up. I couldn't process it all in real time. And there are, of course, so many takes, and you'll get some takes here as well. But I do want to start things off by giving a shout out to California Extreme, the classic arcade pinball convention that happened in Santa Clara this year. They're back in form. I didn't get a chance to go. Sure, I believe you did not go.
I did not go.
But who did show up and who was there in force was former podcaster, former host of this show, Jeremy Williams. And I would call him, he wouldn't say it's the second time, but it is the second time that he brought an arcade that to show off there, because of course, along as a part of Tested, he and Sean Charlesworth and the team at Other Ocean made Star Lords, their 6-player arcade game. Remember that? Yeah, 6-player tabletop cocktail style arcade game they brought to California Extreme a couple of years ago. We did a whole build series about it. They're very proud of it. And Jeremy, of course, now works as a developer, as an engineer over at Other Ocean. And it's been announced that Other Ocean is working on the Atari 50th anniversary collection of games. So the history of classic Atari games compiled and emulated and put alongside interviews and all this great nostalgia alongside some original game content. And Jeremy was able to demo the game that he's working on at California Extreme, also in an arcade form factor. I saw pictures, a little bit of video, and it looks so cool.
So would you call it Vector Scatter?
Vector Sector, I believe.
Vector Sector.
Yes, it's very hip. No vowels. VCTR-SCTR. And I think, Jeremy, they were able to hire Small Change Arcade, who we've interviewed on the show before. This is a guy locally in San Francisco who creates miniature. He
has like mini arcades.
Yeah, mini arcades.
You can rent from him.
Yes, for parties. Been at Maker Faire, and I guess they had a custom one of the game Jeremy's working on. Of course, the big lit up marquee, 2 players, 4 joysticks, and a widescreen LCD. Lots of lighting. You got coin slot operation, and 2-player game, and it's a vector based tribute to classic vector-based arcade games. I don't want to spoil too much. I've seen some of the gameplay, but I think whenever the game is released, we'll hopefully have Jeremy on the show to talk about his journey in making it.
Yeah, I think the word Atari will conjure the right images. If you think vector and Atari, you're going to get the right inspiration in terms of the games that this drew a lot from. It looks so cool. And now, I'm sorry, my friend Jeremy. Now you're on the hook for every California Extreme debuting a new game. That's just how
every couple of years. Yeah. Every couple of years. I mean, it's the thing that he says he wakes up every morning thinking about. And that's exciting. I'm so happy. Could not be happier for him. And I really hope that he has a chance to jump on the show in the future whenever the game gets released. But of course, we're going to talk about the big pop culture news that happened this week. I mean, this was even after we had the passing of Bill Russell, of Nichelle Nichols, of Vin Scully, legendary broadcaster, like all these titans of culture, just in the same week gone. And then we had to shift gears and reckon with this real-time development of the news, the leaked news, the first rumors, then confirmed news, then analysis, and now today, as we saw in the Warner Brothers Discovery earnings report, the explanation and the rationale for the canceling of the Batgirl film.
Yeah, and just to put this in sort of chronological order. So there was reported leaks that Batgirl was canceled, and there was a reaction to that. I wasn't one of those people that had much of a reaction to the cancellation, because I wasn't super excited about Batgirl. I was excited about that character getting play, but it was always envisioned inside of the DC EU, which has just been a mess. And I think that tamped down my excitement for a standalone Batgirl film.
Let me give you my counter to that, Kishore, because I think we all entered from different states of mind. My state of mind, and I've said on the podcast, I was very much looking forward to this Batgirl movie, not show, because one, the directors involved. It's Adil and Bilal, these two directors who directed Bad Boys for Life, which was a breakthrough, like a surprise, amazing hit, incredible action film. And then they did the first and last episodes of Ms. Marvel. And based on that, and then going to do their take on Batgirl, my hopes were real high. My hopes were incredibly high that they were going to take the energy that they brought to, and the inventiveness they brought to action and to storytelling in Ms. Marvel, and in action in the Bad Boys for Life movie, and put that in a beloved DC character. And then I was also really, really interested in the casting too, because they were going to go somewhere different with Batgirl. 100%. And they had cast Leslie Grace, who is a really great newcomer. She's a singer. She had a breakthrough role in the Lin-Manuel movie, In the Heights.
In the Heights, yeah.
Yes, she plays she was in The Heights, and then she won the coveted role. You had Brendan Fraser as the villain. It's Firefly. Yep. Which kind of a C-grade villain, but it's a rogues gallery-esque villain. And then
Brendan Fraser has his fans to this day. So
absolutely,
I think I wouldn't underrate that aspect of it.
No, I think piggybacking off of the popularity and the recognition he got from the role from Doom Patrol, right? Also a part of that, the DC streaming service that was now on HBO Max, and of course the return of Michael Keaton, right? Like we all expected. We saw the teaser for The Flash, and this isn't about The Flash, but Michael Keaton is back as Batman in The Flash, and we were all curious about how he would be integrated in the Batgirl film, because it is still technically, as you said, the DCEU that was kicked off with the Snyderverse films, with Man of Steel, because you had J.K. Simmons as Commissioner Gordon. So you had the Commissioner Gordon from Batman v Superman and Justice League, and I think it was just Justice League. Yeah, Justice League, not Batman v Superman, and it was a continuation of that story, but also the Michael Keaton Batman. So multiverse possibilities.
But part of this is how crazy the story went because the first thing that leaked was that Batgirl was canceled. Yeah. And people were bummed about that. And again, I wasn't one of them, but you listed all the reasons people were bummed about that cancellation. And then it starts to emerge. They haven't just canceled Batgirl. They're going to write off the movie. as a loss, meaning it will never be released in any capacity whatsoever. And with that comes the reveal that the movie is basically done and that they're doing this.
Yeah.
And so in this swirl, people are like, wow, is this movie really bad? But then when the tax write-off comes out, people start to really flip. And then the real just torrent of stuff starts emerging. People discover shows on HBO Max that have gone missing. 6 original shows,
movies
that were on HBO Max, were removed from the catalog. And this is on the wave of news that there has been a merger between Discovery and Warner Brothers, and so changes were coming, but it just started happening so fast and furious without any official statement, and so the speculation runs rampant. And I think the most illustrative point, as we got to the earnings call today, is when people looked at satisfaction rates on different streamer services. HBO Max #1, not by a ton, but it was still #1.
Yeah.
And I think that number is going to be a lot lower.
Well, there's also HBO Max launched with this wave of confusion as well, as we've talked about. It piggybacked off of the HBO brand, but it actually technically is a different. And from the consumer's perspective, it's confusing, but from the business side, it's actually almost 2 different divisions. It's a different P&L. It's a different budget. HBO still exists today as an entity, as a streaming, not a streaming, but as a value add premium network that you can buy on top of a cable subscription, for example. But HBO itself is a subset of HBO Max. HBO Max is the umbrella streaming venture. And the idea is that some people probably don't even have access to HBO Max because they're just paying for HBO via their Comcast or their Dish Network subscriptions. And HBO Max had extra money that went under the ownership of AT&T and the previous CEO. They wanted to grow and be this big competitor to Netflix and Amazon. And so you had this strategy of focusing a ton of effort and focus on building the HBO Max subscription base, and that's how you get this huge satisfaction rating of over 90%. And they did the day and date releases all over 2 years ago, or last year, I guess, with Wonder Woman through Matrix, and that was its whole source of consternation in Hollywood with the filmmakers, expecting a full theatrical release. You had on the not even the Disney Scarlett Johansson the legal battles, but it was not what Hollywood was used to and not how business was traditionally done. But it did open a lot of opportunities, especially during this lockdown period when theaters weren't open, for movies that previously would have gotten a small theatrical release to sell to a streaming service, and some of them did appear on HBO Max, and some of them were funded primarily just as a HBO Max exclusive. You had some pretty good mid-budget movies. We always talked about where is the 30, 40, $50 million movie, that's no small amount of money, but in a world where Marvel movies and big blockbusters cost $200+ million and are expected to make 4 times that at the global box office, we got to find room for movies that cost between $20 and $70 million.
Yeah, for me, HBO Max was up there. I still think Apple TV Plus is the best streaming service right now, in terms of their original scripted content. But HBO Max was right there. You had stuff like Station 11. You had stuff like Starstruck, which I really love. These indie hits, Infinity Train as an animated show that did really well. And so it just became a darling. And we got to this investor call today, basically. I don't know what to call it. It was basically a sales pitch. And basically the person on the Discovery side, who is now in charge, came in and basically laid out their reasoning. And basically he said, we make money three basic ways. Our movie studios, which he had DC listed in that sort of movie studio realm. the networks, and a lot of that is driven by carriage fees. So like when you have a cable subscription and you have TLC and CNN, you pay X percentage of your cable subscription goes towards having that channel. And that's the majority of money that they make is from that. And what they call direct to consumer. And those are people paying for streaming services, whether it be Discovery Plus or HBO Max. And that's the smallest kind of piece of the pie. There's a couple other kind of pieces, but those are the three main ones that are important. And what he basically said was, while direct to consumer is growing in the future, it's not making a lot of money right now. And we're going to combine everything on Discovery Plus, which is all the kind of unscripted reality TV type stuff. There's a lot of like home improvement shows. There's a lot of reality shows, that kind of stuff, with the content from HBO Max into one bundled service that's going to launch next year in early 2023. He didn't provide a date. I think what was important that struck me about what was said was he seemed to indicate streaming was underpriced compared to what the market will pay for quality, quote unquote. And I think that is an indication that whatever this service is going to be called, HBO to the max, I don't know, like it's going to be more than the $15 a month that HBO Max is for most subscribers right now. And there's going to be trimming of types of original production that are made from HBO Max to kind of, fit this model. So I think this hurts the kind of consumer that we both are, which love original scripted content, the indie stuff, the stuff that is innovative and different, those like 0-day movie kind of releases. This is going to destroy a lot of that content.
Yeah,
I think like the blockbuster show is still going to show up there.
Sure. Yeah,
but
Game of Thrones. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and I think it sounds like with the news of or the reports of potential cancellations of these direct to stream movies that they'd be investing in, that they're going to take fewer risks, and it is about more so the bottom line than anything, and the name of whatever this streaming service ends up being when it launches in the US next summer will be very telling. Whenever they announce that name, I think it'll be telling about where the division of funds will end up going, if they're going to focus more on the unscripted reality type shows and fewer of, your competent directors making mid-budget films or bold series. And HBO Max, HBO is, even with the HBO Max, and I've expressed when they launched HBO Max, I expressed a bunch of uncertainty and skepticism about broadening the audience, because with HBO it was about they weren't going necessarily for mass market. They were going for quality. They were going for a high price appointment television, and it turns out with HBO Max you still had that level of quality. You had the Ridley Scott Raised by Wolves show. You have you have John Oliver, of course, and you have Station 11. You have weird stuff like that new Nathan Fielder show, The Rehearsal. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't imagine that show getting funded and in a Discovery Plus HBO Max merge streaming service. Like that seems like they would look at the number of views, and they're not going to take risks on things to get the cultural traction.
So one positive thing I'll say is HBO Max tech has been terrible from launch. I think it has one of the worst apps. It has one of the worst web interfaces of any of the streaming providers. And there's a lot of discussion today that they're going to use the Discovery Plus tech stack forming the basis for this. I've never used Discovery Plus, so I can't say if it's any better. But that was sort of made as like a big deal here. I can accept that. The thing that I think is the real bet here is that you will watch unscripted shows on a streaming service, a la like how you would watch The Office on Netflix or something like that, that it was just sort of like comfort viewing. Most of the people that I know that watch unscripted television are like flipping channels and will stop by it on like in like a cable way.
Yeah.
They don't make it appointment viewing on streaming services where there's a lot of competition.
Yeah.
And I think they're making a clear bet that people will sub into streaming services and watch a lot of that unscripted content that's cheaper to produce. And I don't believe it. And then the other thing is they're going to raise the price. This is going to be $20 a month for this thing, whatever it is. And frankly, if they're cutting back on the stuff that I like the most, I can't imagine being a consumer for this. But that is where they're going. And it's such an interesting place if you're Netflix all of a sudden, who you had the premium pricing in the market and people have been criticizing your library. Now, like your main rival that has had the library, has had the quality content, basically kneecapped itself and said they're going to raise prices maybe above what you're charging.
Yeah. Yeah. You look at, and it's a really interesting comparison with Amazon and the Apple TV Plus, and you're saying Apple TV Plus being your favorite, is both those companies don't have to rely on the streaming business to be the anchor of their business in the short term, right? Apple can charge $5 a month and still spend billions on content because they have the money to spend, and they can play the long game of just being relevant now and being a very, and just by comparison, making a $15 or $20 month subscription service look expensive, right? That just is a power move on their part.
Yeah, it'd be like if Chevron opened a streaming platform. It's like not part of the core business, and they could just put whatever on there and be happy. And they've done good work, don't get me wrong, but it's just not part of the core business, so they subsidize the heck out of it.
Yeah, and to the extent that you look at Disney, and that is just a purely media company, but the strength of Disney Plus is on characters and IP and brands. And that's not to say that Warner Brothers doesn't have characters. They have DC and they have Looney Tunes, and they tried rebooting Looney Tunes and making them relevant in the way that Mickey Mouse is relevant, and that didn't seem to really work with things like Space Jam.
I'm fine with them canceling Space Jam. I'm really fine with that.
Same here. But with DC, they're announcing this new 10-year plan. Like the consolation to canceling Batgirl and the company line is that they're going for quality. And from their perception, even though the reports are that Batgirl screen tested in the 60 to 70s, which is to say 60-70% of the people who watched it in the early screening rated it good or great. It's not a D rating. It's actually a pretty good rating. They want 80s and 90s. They want the Marvel level of satisfaction and excitement for those films. And the reason that Disney Plus can be so successful with their genre-based shows is because they are working off of the momentum of the MCU, of 10 years of MCU excitement, of decades of Star Wars excitement, and then saying now you have this must-see digital version, streaming companion projects that you have to watch on the new HBO Max Discovery Plus service. If they're rebooting DC for another 10-year plan, they have to simultaneously make that exciting in the theatrical run, as well as develop anything for streaming if they want to get people to pay to watch those characters on a streaming service, which I think is an uphill battle.
Yeah, the only advice to give DC is basically reboot and just focus on making good movies, and the rest can follow. Which is basically what you're saying. Is like once you establish a vision and really execute on those first films that allow you to talk about that vision publicly, that's where you go. You don't get out by being like, here's our 10-year plan. Like Kevin Feige didn't go up before Iron Man and was like, here's the 10-year plan for Marvel.
He could have thought it.
Did that after 4 movies were out.
Yeah. And you know what? For DC fans, the multiverse is woven into the fabric of the writing. Call it a crisis. Whatever you want to do. They had the TV Crisis stuff. To have 3 different versions of Batman, which is what we were going to have appear on screen small screen and big screen in some capacity is okay. Like it turns out like Matt Reeves' successful take on Batman Year 2 showed that mainstream audiences weren't going to get confused with different Batman people different versions of Batman on the screen. And if they're, as long as they're good stories, as long as it matches and satisfies what superhero fans have imagined in their heads as they read those comic books, then they're going to do well. And then if they want to have some multiversal crisis story, it's not going to be too complicated. What Marvel has proven is that audiences are sophisticated enough to follow complex plots across multiple films, as long as you make good movies and good content.
Doesn't even have to be a connected universe. That's what just make good films and everything will be fine.
Yeah, I'm still super disappointed. I mean, it's going to be the stuff of legend, this Batgirl film. And the thing
it's going to get leaked. Somebody's going to leak a screener of it. Like, it's just going to happen. And it's going to do Zack Snyder cut numbers as the bot army takes hold.
I mean, it reminds me, there was a Wonder Woman TV show before they did the Wonder Woman films with Adrienne Palicki, that David E. Kelly. I mean, talk about, there was a She-Hulk, essentially, version of Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman, Ally McBeal style storytelling that they did a whole pilot for, reshot the pilot with a new costume, and then also decided not to release. And then at some point it did get leaked. I think it's less likely in this case. I don't know what the status of the effects. I mean, they definitely wrapped shooting months ago now, but yeah, at some point it's got to be on someone's hard drive, and they can't legally do it. It would be if they're doing a big tax write-off, then the IRS will come after them. So it can't be some type of Zack Snyder's Justice League style fan movement to get
quote,
this
unquote.
Bot movement to get this released. It would have to be some insider. Final point, I think it was the showrunner of the Dickinson TV show on Apple TV Plus that mentioned this, but she said that when they wrapped the show, she begged the executives to give her a hard copy of the show, because it was a show that they produced that it would only be streaming, and she wanted something that would she could keep and have a record of, because as we see shows disappearing, and this happens across all publishing platforms, games, the Ubisoft stuff that happened a couple weeks ago with games leaving services. We've seen accidentally entire YouTube channels disappear because of some content ID violation or some mismanagement of the owner email address. Like, nothing lasts forever. And
even digital purchases, not even like streaming, like movies people have paid for on platforms even as reliable as Amazon.
There's the concept of reliability and the concept of an archive. That's not why these companies exist. And I think we need to, as a culture, as a society, rely less on and expect less of companies to be stewards of the culture, because as soon as the money goes the other way, they will not have the interest in keeping any of that forever.
I wonder if cable makes a resurgence next year with all this nonsense from the streaming wars.
YouTube TV. Okay, moving on. Shows that we are excited about. I want to give some shout outs. There was a new Andor trailer.
Loved it. I was surprised. And I partially loved it. Is Andor, well, there's a couple recognizable characters, but Andor is really the only recognizable character. Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera are in this as well. But this isn't like, your trailers for like Mandalorian and other things that are jam-packed with like recognizable figures from the universe. This felt like so much like smaller and much more about Birth of the Rebellion. And I really got behind like the story they're telling. To tell you how much I was into this, when they snapped to a shot in the trailer of the Imperial Senate, I was like, yeah, Senate. That makes sense. I was into Imperial Senate scenes. That's how much I was into this trip.
Trade Federations better make some appearance. I mean, it's space politics and espionage, and it doesn't look small scale. Like it looks like it's going to be across multiple planets. It looks like they are making heavy use of course of the volume, as well as from some of the behind the scenes stuff we've seen, just massive sets being built out. And this is 12 episodes, so this is the first foray in the longer form storytelling, and hopefully the door open for maybe even season 2. I mean, if Better Call Saul, which is wrapping up this month, can do it, and you can have 40-year-old actors playing their 20-year-old selves, then Diego Luna can do Andor for a couple of seasons before we culminate to where we first see him in Rogue One. I mean, they got to do K2SO at some point, right? You can't have the show without K2SO. Sandman, The Sandman, Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, premieres tonight as you're listening to this on Friday on Netflix. Standard, all the episodes dropped at once. I've been watching some of the clips they've been releasing online. I'm getting very, very excited about this. Haven't seen an episode yet, but just want to put out there in case you don't have it on.
Yeah, 10% of the fan base is going to be unhappy no matter what. And I'm in the other 90% waiting to see how it is.
Yep. And while Andor will be a Wednesday night premiere show, as the previous Star Wars shows have been, She-Hulk is going to be Thursday night. So you're not going to have those long Wednesday late nights or long Tuesday late nights to watch a Marvel show and a Star Wars show for a couple months. You're going to have She-Hulk one day after. It's a must-see TV is what they're calling it. And I'm here for that as well.
I'll watch it. I have middling expectations for it.
Oh, I'm very excited for it. I think it's going to do very well. I think especially with the cameos we've seen so far from at Comic-Con and the trailers. We need to acknowledge that Nichelle Nichols, Uhura, passed away this past week at age 89, and there have been many obituaries, remembrances, and stories that have been shared from people who worked with her, people who admired her, everyone from previous co-stars to astronauts to members of the civil rights movement. And it is an incredible life, an incredible role, and who she was not only on the show, but in real life. And we're very fortunate I met her once at Comic-Con a couple of years ago at one of the Comic-Con events, and she was very lovely. And yeah, she'll be missed.
Same, met her once. Uhura will go down as one of the most important characters in science fiction history, both because of the casting and the context of when that show happened, and what that role opened up for so many others in the industry to follow. I think we can't forget that Uhura is one of the first featured female characters in science fiction that most people witnessed. By no means the first, but one of the earliest popular women to be featured in a science fiction series.
Yeah, and the role of Uhura the torch has been proudly carried on, both in the J.J. Abrams films and Zoe Saldana, and now in Strange New Worlds. Celia Rose Gooding, who's doing an incredible job, and I think really doing the character a great service. One of the best characters on that show with amazing backstory, and yeah, really fun to watch. A little bit of technology moves before we do some science this week, and I got Steam Deck news. First of all, good news for people who have pre-ordered the Steam Deck. Valve announced that they have ramped up production, and they expect to be fulfilling demand sooner than they had estimated for everyone. So anyone currently, as of I guess end of July, who's in the reservation queue, will get their Steam Deck pre-order or order email, official email to pay for one, to get one this year. So people who previously were expecting the ability to buy one in Q4 are now put into Q3. it's like a 3-month jump, and everyone else is now solidly in Q4. So we'll be able to buy one for Christmas. It's going to be a great holiday season for Steam Deck. And internationally, also some good news as well for fans of the Steam Deck overseas in Asia. Valve has partnered with a distributor previously who they worked with to distribute the Valve Index overseas as well, Komodo. So their retail site, they have the rights to sell the Steam Deck in Taiwan, in Japan, Hong Kong, and South Korea later this year. And so pre-orders, I believe, are open now. That does it for just some quick technology news. Do I have a music cue? Yeah, why not? Oh, we had 2 of these, Kishore. It's been so long since I've played one of these. Let's try this one.
Now it's time for a moment of science.
When the music kicks in, it's either something horrific or amazing. This week, we're going to do a little bit of both. Let's start with something horrific. It's finally time we talk about monkeypox. I know a lot of listeners have heard a lot about monkeypox, but I'm going to try to put a lot of information together all at once just to give people an understanding of sort of the state of things now. The basics. Monkeypox is a zoonotic disease, which means it was in an animal reservoir and jumped to a human. It's in a family of viruses called the orthopox virus. Variola is also in this family of viruses. That is the virus that causes smallpox. Monkeypox is endemic, meaning it's just transmitting in the community in a few West African countries, and it has been for a number of years. There's some variants, like sort of country to country there. So there's a couple different versions of this, but this has been in existence for a little while. The illness typically lasts 2 to 4 weeks. It's excruciatingly painful, where you develop these sores all over your bodies. Oftentimes these sores become almost open wounds, and that's where a lot of the pain comes from. In May of this year, a monkeypox case was detected in England, and in the last couple of months, that case has essentially seeded cases around the world in numerous different countries. So, how monkeypox spreads? It transmits through close personal contact. Typically, we think the virus is part of those sores. So when those sores come in contact with another piece of skin, the virus is able to transmit. So it's this really close skin to skin contact, typically prolonged in a lot of ways. We also think that the virus is in other bodily fluids, even potentially in some respiratory secretions, but we don't know as much there. We think that this can also transmit by somebody having a sore, transmitting onto like a sheet or a piece of fabric, and then that piece of fabric coming in close contact with you for an extended period of time. There is evidence of this transmitting through sexual intercourse, so oral and vaginal sex, genital touching, prolonged hugging and kissing. So like these really close, prolonged periods of contact. We believe that somebody that has monkeypox can spread it from the time their symptoms start until the rash is fully healed, which is a period of 2 to 4 weeks. We don't know at this point if the virus can spread asymptomatically, and we don't have a good understanding of the mechanisms if it is passing through these respiratory secretions, like through mucus or something else, how it might be spread that way. The current state of things. So as of when we're recording this, which is Thursday night, the WHO has identified 27,000 cases worldwide. About 400 of them are in those West African countries where it's already endemic. About 26,500 are in other nations. About 7% of those cases have required hospitalization, primarily for pain caused by the rashes and sores. There have been a few deaths, but they have been limited so far. The real concern here is that as it continues to spread, it gives the virus an additional opportunity to mutate and potentially develop mutations that allow it to transmit more easily. The WHO has maintained data on gender for about 75% of the cases. 99% of that 75% are male. So just to give you kind of a level set, we are going to talk about some things that have been stigmatized here in a couple seconds, but I think it's important just to get the information out there. Vaccines, before we go on. So there is a vaccine that was developed for smallpox that is being administered for this. That vaccine is 85% effective. Part of the reason it can be administered is because these viruses come from the same family. That monkeypox or that smallpox vaccine has been in deep storage in a number of locations. Which means that it has to be sort of drawn out and then sort of like carefully thawed and recapped and bottled for distribution. Right now, the U.S., I'm just going to talk in a U.S. context because that's data we have. The U.S. will have about 1.1 million doses of the vaccine available in the near term. Health officials estimate that we need probably between 3.5 million to 5 million doses to actually curb the spread. We don't expect a new delivery beyond that 1.1 million doses until maybe October. So even though doses exist, because of the problem of like there's one company essentially taking it out of refrigeration and doing this, and it would take months for a new company to come online, we're not going to see any more doses come online beyond those 1.1 million until the fall or early next year. The U.S. has ordered, I think, just over 5 million doses of the vaccine, but a lot of that's not going to be fulfilled till next year. Okay, now we have to talk about some of the stigma associated to this, because I think it's been commonly reported that a majority of people that have this disease are gay men. So right now, as I said, 75% of the cases we know the gender, and 99% of that 75 are male. We know the sexual orientation of about 7,500 of the 27,000 cases reported. And the majority, 97.5% of those are men that have sex with other men. And I think what's important here is that is to be sort of upfront and honest. This is spreading more rapidly in communities and in close contact where there's unprotected sex happening, most often between men and other men. And what we need to do is make sure the limited number of vaccines that we have available are actually targeted to those communities first, those that are most vulnerable. Why am I saying this? This is the lesson from COVID. We saw early on with COVID, when we had limited vaccine, that the people that were most exposed, these are oftentimes essential workers that were out there, had to be more exposed to the virus, often had the hardest time getting access to the vaccine. That led to increased spread in those communities and an increased burden of death in those communities. We can do something different here. But it takes really using careful communication and language, engaging those communities, listening to their concerns, and then instituting both behavioral changes that have to start at the individual and community level, and then having easy access to the vaccines. That's the way we're going to stem this tide. For people that want more information, one of the great science journalists going right now is this guy, Kai Kupferschmidt. He's an infectious disease reporter for Science magazine. He's also a gay man living with HIV. He published an essay in the New York Times today where he goes into detail about these issues, everything from the stigmatization to how we have to be really honest about this, and really the pathways, given what we know about infectious disease, how to tamp this out. we are unfortunately on a pathway for this to become endemic in a lot of Western nations. So right now, I think the focus has got to be on some behavioral changes to limit the spread, and then vaccination in targeted places. So, Norm, for you and I, probably as we have limited contact with people anymore, probably the vaccine for us, we shouldn't be in the priority group. But as the vaccine becomes more and more available, I think you'll see more widespread vaccination. So I'm going to stop there and see if you have any questions before we go
on. What is the treatment situation like right now?
Treatment is you are in a lot of pain for 2 to 4 weeks, and they give you different painkillers and different sort of topical treatments for the rash, but there is not much.
Wow. Is there an associated...
There's more severe cases where they do employ different sort of treatment regimens, but right now it's mostly pain management.
Jeez. So just expecting people to just kind of suffer through it and isolate. And yeah, I guess the difference is it is they're mobilized, if it's that excruciating, and from what I've heard, it is extremely painful. Is there a R number that epidemiologists are looking at?
There is. I would. I'm not going to even say it because I think it's not important to look at it right now, because I think our detection of these cases is below the kind of thresholds we need to establish what that number is well. I do think there are some scientists that have come out with some estimate and ranges, but at this point it's relatively early in the community transmission phase of this that I don't think it's worth looking at that number, because the range is pretty wide, as I've seen. That might be narrowing as we go along, but I've seen sort of a pretty wide range. So It's not worth talking about, I think.
Is it the case that the federal government has taken over they control the stockpile, the vaccines, and they made the order, so that's happening on their timelines, but are they kind of taking over the response to this now, or is it still on a case like state by state basis?
So 2 things have happened. So first, the WHO declared this sort of a worldwide pandemic, which activates certain resources and supplies to some of the vaccine manufacturers. But also activates, some countries have systems that go into place when WHO declares that. Then the US declared a public health emergency, which allows increased executive branch functions in terms of distribution and supply, and gives the CDC some additional authority. So as it stands, the CDC is distributing vaccine supply to the states, very similar to how we saw early days of COVID vaccination. And then the states, often down to county health departments, have a lot of jurisdiction and control in terms of how it's administered. So here in San Francisco, where we live, most of the doses are being administered through the San Francisco General Hospital, which is the county hospital. And there's one spot to go. There's been lines wrapping around the block, and basically they have a Twitter account that tells you how many doses they have, and people are lining up to get it, and they're administering as many doses as they get.
All right. That answers a lot of the questions.
Yeah. So we started with horrifying. We'll go to slightly less horrifying. So last week, the director of Roscosmos, I'm not saying that right, but the Russian,
yes,
the Russian cosmonaut agency, Yuri Borisov, said that Russia would not renew their commitment to the International Space Station after the agreement ends in 2024. We've known about this agreement and ending for a number of years. NASA has indicated they want to extend that agreement, along with other nations that are involved in the International Space Station. It's not just the US and Russia, to 2030, which they think is a legitimate lifespan extension given where the ISS is right now. In slightly more positive news, given that Yuri said, we're not renewing this at all, and 2024 is not far away, Sergei Krikalev, who's another high executive there, kind of walked back those comments a little bit today, and indicated that they're still having discussions about the extension. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that Russia will not renew this past 2024. And I think there's going to be a lot of work done, but they don't have long, because this isn't like a baseball or a sports contract with somebody where like you sign the contract and you're just ready to go, because there's so much maintenance and stuff. They really need to get any deal hammered out in the next like 6 months or so, that they have time, if Russia decides to pull out of this, to make some plans. I've heard that plans are already being in place if Russia does pull out, and on how to extend the mission, but it may not be able to go to 2030 if that's the case. This is terrible. Like, the International Space Station was a beacon as much as it was a scientific experiment, and I'm just deeply saddened to see this kind of international cooperation fall by the wayside.
Yeah. And especially if what's to come after it is not something. I mean, the geopolitics of the world is completely different now than, and it's not to say that things weren't tense, post Cold War, but the rare moments in between tension, and we are in the midst of that, are places to find cooperation. And you would hope that the pursuit of science and space exploration is something that is agnostic to political climate.
But I promised amazing, right? So we're not going to end on a downer note. We're going to go back and visit, I think, one of Jeremy's favorite science stories. We're going to talk about DeepMind. Jeremy was obsessed with DeepMind when it was playing Go, when it was like playing all these games, when it was playing StarCraft. As we've discussed here, it got into the protein folding game a few years ago. Last year, in a year that COVID vaccines were developed, Science Magazine named AlphaFold, which is the segment of DeepMind that's been working on predicting protein structures, as their breakthrough of the year. It had predicted structures for, I think, in the neighborhood of 350,000 different proteins.
Wow.
Just as a level set. Proteins are basically like the engine of life. Like, proteins are basically provide the instructions for everything that happens inside of cells, like viruses. It is the engine of what happens. And what really dictates what proteins do isn't just their chemical composition, but the shape they take. And because protein strands are so big, they can fold into just in an incredible number of different configurations, given the nature of their chemical makeup. And one of the things that has been really challenging is being able to predict that shape with a high degree of accuracy. Most of the way that it's done is experimentally, where you literally fold the protein and then confirm via imaging, did it fold into this shape? And there's been some predictive work that goes into that, but by and large, that has been the most precise way that we've actually measured protein folding. You can imagine that doesn't scale when we're talking about hundreds of millions of different possible configurations of proteins. Well, DeepMind, when it said it had predicted, and these are predictions, these aren't experimental runs, these are based off of modeling and in ingesting an incredible amount of knowledge about geometry, chemical compositions, all sorts of things. They have predicted 350,000 different protein structures. It was heralded as like, this is what AI was really meant for. Well, last week, they just decided on a random Wednesday, they're like, here's an update. We've predicted 200 million different protein structures. Not just 200 million protein structures in humans, but across 1 million different species. And this is getting close to all of the possible predictive structures of proteins. And what is becoming a reality now is you can go to this database of predictive proteins. And if you're a scientist, you can kind of Google search this database based on what you're looking for, and it'll give you a predicted structure. You can then use that in your experiment to actually confirm that that structure is actually taking hold. And because you have this search tool with predictive things that you can do without running the experiment, it accelerates the pace of the work. And once you do that, now you open up all sorts of possibilities in terms of where basic biology can go. Now that we understand these and kind of accelerate like kind of confirmation of what these shapes can do. So you can see accelerated drug development this way. You can see accelerated understanding of different protein function in the course of disease. There is like a million different things this opens up. I want to acknowledge that this is a collaboration with EMBL, which is the European Microbiology Laboratory, and Google that's been working on this together. This is huge, like beyond huge. Wow. This is like technology in service of science in ways that I did not expect that level of acceleration from where we were last year to now.
Science never stops sciencing.
This is incredible. I don't know how else to convey how big of a deal this is. Like, I can go on and on. This is huge. What comes next? There's got to be a lot of experimental confirmation of shapes that people are actually pulling out of the database. Because even with how incredibly effective AlphaFold has been in terms of its predictions versus some experimental confirmations in trials, it's not going to be 100%. And so we're going to get a better understanding as biologists and chemists use this a lot of more understanding what that is for a whole set of these. But this is incredible.
How does this compare to like when scientists were able to first do a full sequence of the human genome?
So, like, you're asking a very tough question, because the Human Genome Project was sort of like landing on the moon in a lot of ways. It was not seen as possible, but like once you did it, part of what that project was about was everything that the project idea enabled on the way, the technology development, the reduction in cost of sequencing that came along with starting that project. So that is not about actually sequencing the genome, but the downstream effects from developing the technology. This is different in the sense this is the technology. And so the downstream effects are almost in reverse, because it's going to enable people just to be faster in a lot of ways. I think we're always going to look back at the Human Genome Project because it's so personal to who we are as a human being. It is literally everything that makes us who we are was decoded on the day of that announcement. This is different. This unlocks our ability to do like a broad set of biological questions. And so if you're asking me, 50 years from now, which one will be more impactful? Well, they're both going to be hugely impactful. I think this is going to have potentially a broader range of impacts across different fields than the Human Genome Project did. But like, you're asking me to pick a favorite child. I don't want to do it.
to be determined. Yeah. A new toolbox for research. Very cool. That's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Kishore. That was a great moments of science. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for joining. Kishore, thanks for joining me on this late Thursday night. I'm debating whether to watch The Sandman or not. I'm leaning toward yes.
I'm going to happen. So even though it's dropping all at once, I'm going to space it out.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And speaking of spacing things out, one final shout out. I don't think we might even mentioned last week on Disney Plus. It's Light and Magic, the ILM documentary, and 6 episodes. Incredible. That is one to savor. I know it's all out there. They released it all at once, but that is even though it's like it's history and it's a lot of it is going over. If you're a fan of Star Wars, if you're a fan of special effects, visual effects, you may have read all these stories before in the making of Star Wars books. But what they were able to do in the visual medium, and not just with interviews of with Dennis Muren, Phil Tippett, Sean Dykstra, like Ken Rolston, all these luminaries and visual effects pioneers, the original wizards of the ILM that made up ILM. Getting Lawrence Kasdan to direct this and do the interviews, you get a real sense of the respect that the interviewees have with the interviewer. They are peers talking to each other. He doesn't put himself into the documentary, which is that's always been a pet peeve of mine when I watch these documentaries and documentarians making it about themselves and their own personal stories. But really, the access and the generosity of the original ILMers in sharing their home movies and sharing their very, very personal and vulnerable stories about the uncertainties and the possibility of making Star Wars, right, and all the films to follow, it just makes this a really rare treat.
I have one final plug. Silicon's in just a few weeks. I'm working on my cosplay this weekend. You should be too. So many tested friends are coming. You've heard us talk about like Bill Duran, Beverly Downen, Evil Ted Smith. Yeah, he was announced this week. There's an incredible lineup. I think we'll all be there.
Yes. I'll be there both Saturday and Sunday. Tested is going to have a big booth. I can announce that. Yeah, I can say it. We'll have a big booth set up. We'll have artifacts, costumes, props, things we've worked on, and come by, say hi. We'll be filming some videos. Adam, of course, is going to be all over the place as it is his show. I'm not personally involved in the running of it, so I'm going to be excited as an attendee to see. And it's funny. I'm looking at the guest list, and they got the Jack Reacher. They got the new Jack Reacher, and we just binged that in this household. So I'm actually pretty excited to see him there. He also, I think, played Hawk and Hawk and Dove in the DC Titans show. Yeah. So and George Takei, of course, and Karen Gillan of Doctor Who and Guardians of the Galaxy fame.
If you ever want to see Norm and I basically struggle with ourselves around purchases on exhibit floor, you can come watch it in real time. I do it every time I go to a con.
I might bring some Gundam to put together. I don't know. Lots of fun. It's gonna come sooner before I know it, and with a lot more planning, I'm sure, for the team over there to do. But I believe you can just search Silicon with Adam Savage. Silicon SJ is the website. Yep, Silicon SJ, because it's in San Jose.com. And hope to see you there if you happen to be in the Bay Area or in California and want to make the trip. But until next episode, thank you again for listening. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and Kishore and I will see you next week. Do I have an outro? I do this week. It's an oldie, but a goodie, but you guys deserve it. So here we go.
Hi there, I didn't see you. Tested.
Pop culture news. Wow, that was new. Oh, you called me audible there.
I miss having buttons to push.
Yeah. I got kids to push my buttons all day. All right. Good night. See you next week.